We've said this plenty of times. Planet Earth is fully alive and it's always going through changes. So when you're living on it, you can't treat it like it's something dead. This time, it showed itself in Taiwan. On the 3rd of April 2024 at 7:58 a.m., a 7.5 on the Richter scale earthquake happened on the eastern part of Taiwan. At the time we're recording this video, about 10 people have been killed, more than 1,000 people have been injured, and 152 people are trapped. Experts believe that this is just the beginning and these numbers will rise. This was a very severe earthquake and it pretty much shook the entire island of Taiwan. And the thing that makes it even more terrifying, there has been 44 aftershocks after this earthquake happened, and the most violent one was 6.5 on the Richter scale. You have to know, on the eastern part of the world, Japan is very prone to earthquakes. Taiwan is very close and they're no different than Japan. There are a lot of earthquakes happening here as well. And the last violent one happened in the year 1999, 25 years ago. This was a 7.7 on the Richter scale and it killed more than 2,400 people. But what makes it even more terrifying, more than 50,000 buildings were destroyed because of it. At that time, more than $10 billion of damages were reported. But the Taiwan today is much different than the one in 1999, because after this massive earthquake happened, every single building code changed to make it so it can stand against earthquakes. You could say somewhat they got their ideas from Japan, because in Japan there's earthquakes all the time and no buildings fall. And that's because of the engineering used to build them. It costs a lot more money, but when earthquakes happen, they don't collapse and you have to start all over. If you know how the Earth works, you know there are a bunch of tectonic plates around it. And you have to know, in part of Taiwan, the Eurasia plate and the Philippines plate literally meet in the middle of Taiwan. And that's what makes this island very prone to earthquakes. These two plates are always putting pressure on one another, and that what caused the mountain ranges to form in the island of Taiwan. Each year, 75 millimeters are added to the mountain ranges, because that's how much pressure these plates put on one another. This is seen in many countries that are prone to earthquakes. Like in Afghanistan, there was a recent earthquake, or a couple years ago there was an earthquake in Turkey and Syria, and these are all mountainous countries with fault lines running through them. Even the formation of this island was because of these tectonic plates. Geologists believe about 5 million years ago, these plates put pressure on one another, and that formed this island. So Taiwan is extremely new compared to other islands around the world. Taiwan is a very new island, but if you compare it to the age of planet Earth, not humans. Right now, Taiwan is a very important country, even though some argue that Taiwan belongs to China, but we're not here to argue about that. If you've seen our video about World War microchip, you'll know that Taiwan is the most important country in producing high-quality microchips. And this alone makes this country extremely important. And the problems with the US and China are always over Taiwan. And most of that is because of the technology that's in Taiwan. Neither country wants the opposition to have power there, because they can control the world's microchips. The Americans put all their effort and money into the microchips in Taiwan, and they don't want China to take over and have all that power around the world. And of course, the Chinese don't want Taiwan to be taken by the Westerners, because they believe island belongs to mainland China. But right now, this is just a Cold War, because both sides know if they mess around too much, they can pretty much destroy the whole world. At 7:58, when the earthquake happens, the Taiwanese immediately reported to the Philippines that there's going to be a huge tsunami coming your way, because the earthquake happened on the eastern part of the island and the first shore is the Philippines. They said the tsunami could be as high as 3 meters high, so they were forced to evacuate all beaches. But thankfully, the waves that reached the Philippines was only 3 meters, and that's because the earthquake happens inland rather than in the ocean, so a tsunami was not formed. The time the earthquake happens made sure a lot of people weren't killed because most people were going to work, and a lot of people were already at work or awake. The interesting part is that most of the people that were killed because of this earthquake weren't because of falling buildings. They were actually because of falling stuff around the house or a workplace. Like for example, a TV fell off and hit them. This is why a lot of people suggest if you live in an area that's prone to earthquakes, don't leave stuff above you, because there is a high chance that these things can be shaken off and fall on your head. You could survive the earthquake, but just because a pot was above you and it hit you in the head, it could kill you. But this earthquake did show us one thing. The Taiwanese really knew what they were doing because they learned a lot after the 1999 earthquake. 25 years ago, more than 50,000 buildings were destroyed in Taiwan, but yesterday's earthquake only destroyed 125 buildings. These earthquakes destroy road system and bridges as well, because it's like a wave and it literally lifts these road systems up, especially bridges, and destroys them. And more than 36 roadways in Taiwan have been destroyed. The biggest building that's pretty much destroyed and it has to be taken down is this, called the Uranus. It hasn't fell down yet, but they have to bring it down one way or another. Thankfully, the people that were inside this building could easily escape and nobody was hurt because of this. After this earthquake happened, the Taiwanese government asked mainland China for help. And of course, they were very willing to help because they think they're part of the country. But after this, the US also provided help for Taiwan because they didn't want to be left out. They also sent a lot of Japanese geologists and earthquake experts to come examine the area and teach the locals on what's the best way to repair so something like this will never happen again. Until now, the aftershocks are still coming, and unfortunately, the people that are injured and killed will probably rise every single day. Once again, we've had a huge earthquake in the Middle East. On October 7th, 2023, exactly on 11:11 a.m., an earthquake 6.3 on the Richter scale hit the city of Herat in Afghanistan. While the people were processing this type of earthquake, 8 minutes later, another earthquake hit, 5.5 on the Richter scale. Do you think it's over? No. 23 minutes after this shock, another 6.3 earthquake hit the same area. And right after this one, another one with the power of 5.9 hit. Basically, in a span of 30 minutes, 4 different earthquakes hit the city of Herat. These earthquakes have killed more than 2,000 people, more than 2,000 injured, and more than 500 people missing. Around 8 months ago, on February 2023, a massive earthquake hit Turkey and Syria, and it killed around 60,000 people. And 8 months later, another powerful earthquake hit Herat. There are a lot of places in the world that are prone to earthquakes. But why are earthquakes in the Middle East so common? There are many reasons. But when you look at this map, you can get a better idea on why. You have 2 tectonic plates near the Middle East, one called the Arabian Plate and the other one called the Indian Plate. These 2 massive plates are always pushing against the Eurasian Plate, especially the Middle Eastern area. If you know a little bit about Earth's history, you know that these tectonic plates were not always here, and when the supercontinent broke off, this is where they ended up. The Arabian Plate came with the entire continent of Africa, and it hit Iran, which is part of the Eurasian Plate. All this pressure caused the Zagros Mountains to go up in Iran. Even though the Arabian Plate smashed itself into the Eurasian Plate, the pressure has not stopped, and this has been going on for millions of years. All this pressure causes mountain ranges to be formed, and it causes them to grow year after year, but not by a lot, only a few inches per year. You can see how high a mountain range is, but the real deal is happening underground. When tectonic plates are against each other and that pressure builds up and they get stuck, all that pressure continues to build up, and all of a sudden it releases. When these tectonic plates release all that pressure, it causes things like this to happen, and they're called earthquakes. On the other side, the Indian Plate is also putting a tremendous amount of pressure on the Eurasian Plate. This insane pressure has caused the tallest mountain range to be formed in the world, the Himalayas. And just like the Zagros, it continues to grow. But the mountains aside, it's putting an insane amount of pressure against the Eurasian Plate. And the Eurasian Plate fights back. It's not going to get defeated that easily. But all this leads to more earthquakes. And this is exactly what caused the Afghanistan earthquake in Herat. In the Middle East, mainly Afghanistan, Iran, and Turkey, are very prone to earthquakes. You have two massive plates that are pushing against the Middle East, and the Eurasian Plate is massive, so it doesn't want to move, and these plates get stuck to one another. And in different areas of the plate, in different fault lines, different types of earthquakes happen. So the situation is extremely complicated. You can't predict earthquakes, but you can guess. But in the Middle East, you can't even guess, because there are times where it doesn't have earthquakes for more than a century, but all of a sudden you have plenty of earthquakes in a span of a decade. Just like we said, when two plates get stuck to each other and finally release, that's what's called an earthquake. But the insane pressure that builds up never fully releases, and alongside all of this, it causes other tectonic plates to receive stress, and maybe they want to release. And that is exactly why after every earthquake there are plenty of aftershocks, and this is exactly what we're talking about. It might be hard to believe, but 8 months ago in the Turkey-Syria earthquake, there was more than 30,000 aftershocks, and in the Herat earthquake there were 3 massive aftershocks after the main earthquake, and 4 days after the main earthquake, another massive one came with a power of 6.3 on the Richter scale. The earthquake that happened was a few kilometers away from the city of Herat, and the fault line was south of the city, which is called the Herat fault line. But the epicenter of the earthquake was the northern part of the city, which you can see right here. And this is exactly how powerful it was. One of the positive things about this earthquake is that it happened during the day. If it happened during the night, the amount of deaths would be more than 10,000. But even with all that, 2,800 people and more have been killed, and the chances of that number going up is very high. More than 2,000 houses in Herat were destroyed, and this is exactly why we mean it's good that it happened during the day, because most people were outside their houses, and if it was night, the amount of deaths would be tremendously higher. Unfortunately, after this earthquake, the war between Israel and Palestine took off, and the news networks only wanted to cover that. So nobody spoke about this earthquake, and all the news networks were talking about the conflict between these two. It's interesting to note, since the earthquake was close to the Iranian border, a lot of Iranian towns felt it as well. In an area where there was plenty of wars for decades, and it never really had a chance to rebuild itself, is now hit with a massive earthquake. Another good news is that a lot of countries are on board, and they're trying to help the people of Afghanistan. And if you would like to see the list of them, this is the one. The people of Afghanistan really need the world's help. If it's possible for you to help them, please do. One thing we can hope for is that they once again rebuild the city properly, because the earthquakes are not gonna stop, and the only thing you can do is build the buildings safer. In 1997, pretty much near this area, a 7.3 on the Richter scale hit this area. Since it wasn't near a very populated city, not an insane amount of people died, but it was extremely powerful. And it's also interesting to know that the city of Herat felt it as well. So this is what we're saying, where this place is very prone to earthquakes. When you look at the history of earthquakes in the Middle East, all of a sudden in the same century, tens of different earthquakes have hit this area. And it could be in Afghanistan all the way to Western Turkey. All this is because of these two plates, and if we could and it was possible, we would stop these two plates from putting an insane amount of pressure on the Eurasian plate. But you can't do that because you cannot mess with planet Earth. You can do one thing. If you want to build a shack or anything you want to go inside of, build it properly and don't cut corners. In this case, not only is our investment in danger, it's not going to kill us either. Herat is a very historical city and there are ancient buildings, but they are all standing after an insane amount of earthquakes throughout history. Why is that? Because they were properly built. Herat is a very ancient city, so there are very old structures, but a lot of them are still standing today. Do you see this beautiful building? This is called the Herat Citadel, and it was built more than 2,000 years ago. Even though throughout history it was destroyed by the Mongols and the Muslims, but it was always rebuilt, and it still stands today. And since it was properly done, the earthquakes don't bring it down. They might bring a piece of it down, but not the entire thing. Either way, we're very sorry for the people of Herat, and we hope for a speedy recovery. On February 6th, a powerful earthquake hit the border of Turkey and Syria. The place the earthquake hit was in Turkey, but it was on the border of Syria. This earthquake got everybody's attention around the world, so now we want to see what it is and how it happened. We have to know that the Earth is separated to different tectonic plates, and they all move in the direction they please. The lines between these plates are called faults. When these plates get stuck to one another and all of a sudden they slip, an insane amount of energy is released and it causes the Earth to shake. The magnitude and intensity of the earthquake has a Richter scale, and the stronger it is, the higher the number goes. 1 Richter to 2 Richter is very different from one another. 2 Richter is 30 times more powerful than 1, and when it's 3 Richter, it's 30 times again. So 3 Richter is 900 times 1 Richter. Earthquakes usually cause 3 different types of waves. The first wave is the quickest, and it's the first wave you would feel after an earthquake. And by the way it looks, they call it the push and pull wave. The second type of wave that usually happens is like a sea wave, and it goes up and down. But the third type of wave is the slowest one, but in return it causes the most destruction, and that means it pushes and pulls, and it also goes up and down. So you could say it goes in all types of directions, and that's the reason it causes all this destruction. Throughout the entire world, there are these devices called seismometers, and with these tools, they could detect earthquakes all over the world. With the help of seismometers all over the world, they can determine the exact point of interest where the earthquake happened. They basically have to use 3 different seismometers around the point and detect how far the waves went, and with that help, they could figure out where the exact point is. Most earthquakes will happen around the fault lines. The place where the earthquake happened in Turkey and Syria is on the Alp Himalayas belt. And this is the belt we're talking about that comes all the way from the Himalayas and goes to Europe where the Alps are. But it's not only the fault lines and the tectonic plates where earthquakes happen. It could happen in a place where the tectonic plates are very far. In the depths of the earth, there is a lot of pressure on different types of rock, and there is a chance you could stress these pieces of rock out. If these stressed rocks feel like they want to collapse, they will cause an earthquake, and this is outside of the fault lines. In 1968, a 6.5 magnitude earthquake happened in Western Australia, and it made everybody surprised because in that area there is no fault line. But the scientists realized that the reason the earthquake took place in this area was because of the stressed rocks beneath that area. A 6.5 magnitude earthquake is no joke either, but it showed people that it's not only the fault lines that could cause an earthquake. So even if you're in an area that doesn't have earthquakes, you're still not safe from them. The earth is like a living creature, and you can't treat it like some dead being. Don't think you can just build anything on top of this planet and it will be left there forever. You have to build it very strong, or else this will happen. So now we know how earthquakes work. Let's go to Turkey and Syria and see what happened. The center point of the earthquake was the red dot, and that's with a magnitude of 7.8. Just like we said, West Asia is very prone to earthquake, but an earthquake like this in the Middle East has not happened in centuries. After the 7.8 magnitude earthquake in Turkey, a little bit north of that area, a 7.5 magnitude earthquake happened a few hours after it. Right now that we are recording this video, over 25,000 people have been reported dead in Turkey and Syria, and more than 87,000 people injured. It's good to know that the second earthquake was 7.5 magnitude, but after this, 1,052 aftershocks have been recorded, and over 170 of them have been reported over magnitude 4.0. Let's look at the tectonic plates in this area. This is the Anatolia plate. On the right we have the Arabian plate, and the southern part is the African plate. Between these plates, there is a war going on for millions of years, and in the middle of all this, Anatolian plate is getting sandwiched between all of them. The Arabian plate, the African plate from south, and the Eurasian plate from the north are all pushing towards the Anatolian plate, and they've been putting a lot of pressure on it. These pressures we're talking about, it's not like it moves a meter a day. These move centimeters per year. The reason this earthquake was very powerful was because of these pressures were being held up for centuries, and all of a sudden all that power released. The area with the most pressure the Anatolian plate experiences is where the African, Arabian, and Anatolian plate meet, which is a triangle. And this is the reason the earthquake spot is near this triangle. When tectonic plates move around each other freely, they cause no problems for that area. Things get sketchy when these plates get stuck to one another. They put pressure on each other, but they can't move. And year after year, all this pressure builds up. And then all of a sudden, the layers of the Earth's crust can't hold it anymore. And all of a sudden, it releases like a spring. That's the reason this earthquake was extremely powerful. It has been over 200 years since this area has experienced a major earthquake. The previous major earthquake happened in 1822 in Aleppo, Syria. Since it's an old earthquake, they don't know how many people died because of it, but it's estimated that between 20,000 and 60,000 people were killed. The USGS has announced that this area of Turkey and Syria are extremely dangerous to this day, and the chances of another major earthquake and major aftershocks to happen are very high. So the people and authorities are still on the lookout. Geologists believe that the most dangerous earthquake area is in the Anatolian plate. But this doesn't mean a place like the Middle East is all safe and sound. Just like we said, the earth is alive and well, and it likes to move around. Anywhere in the world you build something and want to go inside there, you have to build it properly, or things like this will easily happen. If a place is supposed to have a lot of earthquakes and it doesn't have it for a long time, it's actually very dangerous, because if earthquakes happen little by little, it releases all the pressure and it doesn't build up. And you could say all those little shocks releases stress between the plates. Other than the Middle East, the west side of North America is extremely dangerous for earthquakes. There are 3 fault lines on this area that could cause a major earthquake. The Cascadia Zone, which is inside the Pacific Ocean. We have the San Andreas Fault, which goes through the entire state of California. And we have the Hayward Fault, that's pretty much in Northern California. These 3 put a major danger in all of Western North America, from Canada all the way to Mexico. Not only the danger of an earthquake, but dangers of a tsunami. One of the reasons in Western United States the houses are built with wood is because of earthquakes. And that means if earthquakes happen, it's much lighter and it doesn't collapse as easily. So why are we talking about the west of the US? The reason is that in the year 1906, a terrible earthquake hit San Francisco, and it basically destroys the entire city. On top of that, not only did everything collapse because of the earthquake, everything caught on fire, and whatever was left was burned down. After that, they realized that whatever they built on the ground should be extremely strong and sturdy. If you want to build a small structure, build it with wood, and if something big, make sure it's built properly with steel beams. The results speak for themselves, because in 1989, when another major earthquake hit San Francisco, the damages were so much less, and it wasn't comparable to 1906. Everything was built much stronger and with wood, and that is the reason not a lot of people were killed. The earthquake in '89 was a 7.2 magnitude, but it only caused 63 people to lose their life, and most of those was because of roads and bridges collapsing on top of them, not their house collapsing on them.